The sun was already high in the Arizona sky, turning the dry land into a sea of gold and heat. The wind carried the soft sound of sand shifting over stone, whispering through cactus needles and empty gullies. There, in that endless space, a lone figure moved slowly across the desert. Her name was Nalin, a young Apache woman whose life had changed forever only weeks ago. Her husband, a brave hunter and kind man, had passed away when sickness spread through their small band of people. The world that once felt full of laughter and songs now seemed hollow. The land that had been home to her ancestors for generations had become a place of fear. The white settlers were building towns and fences, and the soldiers told her people where they could and could not go. Nalin had no family left close by. Hunger followed her like a shadow, and loneliness settled deep in her heart. For days she walked under the burning sun, searching for water, food, or even a friendly face. Her moccasins were worn thin and her feet ached with every step. She carried only a small blanket, a clay water jug, and her late husband's knife, not as a weapon but as a reminder of him. When the night came, she would sleep beneath the stars, wrapping herself tightly in the blanket and whispering quiet prayers to the Great Spirit. The desert was not kind. The heat during the day could burn a man's skin, and the cold at night could chill his bones. But Nalin was strong in ways few could see. Her heart carried the strength of her ancestors, and though her body was weak, her spirit refused to give up. She kept walking toward the faint trail she remembered, a trail that led to a small town she had once heard the trader speak of. It was called Dry Creek, a dusty place full of wagons, horses, and rough men who came and went. She did not know what she would find there. She only knew she needed help, food, water, and maybe someone who would listen. By the time she reached the outskirts of Dry Creek, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose. Her steps faltered. The sound of voices and clanging metal reached her ears. She saw the outline of a small wooden town, with smoke curling from chimneys and the faint smell of cooked meat drifting through the air. Her heart leapt with both hope and fear. She hesitated. For people like her, the towns were not safe. Many settlers looked upon the Apache with mistrust. Some believed all tribes were dangerous. Still, Nalin took a deep breath and kept walking. She had no strength left to turn back. The first thing the townsfolk noticed was the silence that followed her steps. A few men standing near the saloon turned their heads. A woman carrying a basket froze. Nalin's clothes were torn, her face pale with exhaustion, and her dark hair hung loose down her back. She looked like a ghost wandering in from the desert. "Who's that?" one of the men muttered. "She's one of them, one of the Apache." Nalin could feel their eyes on her. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask for water, but her voice came out as a whisper. "Please." She stumbled forward and fell to her knees near a water trough beside the livery stable. The cool sound of water splashing filled her ears, and she dipped her hands into it shakily, drinking a few mouthfuls before resting her head on the wood. For a moment, the people just stared. Some whispered. Others shook their heads and walked away. No one wanted to get involved. The world was harsh and kindness had become a rare thing, but one man didn't turn away. Across the street, Cole Harding stood outside the blacksmith shop, a piece of straw between his teeth, watching quietly. Cole was a tall man in his mid-30s with weather-beaten skin and tired eyes that had seen too much. His hat shaded most of his face, but his gaze was sharp. He had come to Dry Creek months ago, hoping to find peace after a long time of drifting from one cattle job to another. He wasn't a hero, not in the way folks told stories. He was just a man who'd made mistakes and carried the weight of them every day. Yet something about the sight of Nalin hit him deep inside. Maybe it was the loneliness in her eyes, or maybe it was because he'd once known what it felt like to be unwanted. The blacksmith beside him grunted. "Don't go near her, Cole. Ain't your business." Cole didn't answer. He dropped the straw and walked across the street. The dirt crunched beneath his boots, and every eye in town seemed to follow him. Nalin lifted her head, frightened, unsure whether he meant to harm her or help. But his steps were slow, careful. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked softly. His voice carried a gentleness that surprised even him. Nalin didn't understand all his words, but she caught his tone. She shook her head slightly. "Water? Please." Cole nodded, filling a tin cup from the trough and handing it to her. "Here, easy now." She drank slowly, the cool water easing her throat. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain but from the sudden relief of being treated like a human being. When the townsfolk saw Cole helping her, the whispers grew louder. "You best leave her be, Harding," someone called out. "Ain't safe taking in her kind." Cole glanced over his shoulder, his jaw tightening. "Ain't anyone else helping, are they?" No one replied. He turned back to Nalin. "You got anywhere to go?" Nalin shook her head again. She didn't, she couldn't. "Then you'll stay in my barn tonight," Cole said finally. "Ain't much, but it's dry and out of sight. We'll figure something in the morning." She didn't know what his words meant exactly, but the tone was clear. Kindness, not threat. She nodded slowly, trusting him because she had no other choice. Cole helped her stand. She was light, frail even, and he could feel her shaking. Together they walked toward his small ranch house on the edge of town, past curious eyes and muttered words. As they reached the barn, the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a purple glow over the desert. Cole opened the door and led her inside. The smell of hay and horses filled the air, comforting in its simplicity. He set down a blanket and handed her a small loaf of bread from his saddlebag. "Eat," he said. Nalin took the bread carefully, almost reverently. She tore a small piece and tasted it, closing her eyes as if she hadn't eaten in days, and she hadn't. Cole leaned against a post, watching her silently. He didn't know her story yet, but he could tell she had walked through something hard, something no one should have to face alone. When she finally lay down to rest, wrapped in her blanket, Cole stepped outside the barn. The desert night was cool now, the stars bright above. He stood there for a long time, his hands resting on his belt, thinking. He didn't know why he had stepped forward back there in town. Maybe it was because he was tired of seeing people turn their backs on each other. Maybe it was because he had been searching for a reason to believe in something good again. Behind him, the faint sound of breathing told him Nalin had fallen asleep. A small, weary soul who had crossed a dangerous world just to find a drop of water and a touch of mercy. Cole tipped his hat and whispered to the night, "Guess we'll figure this out, you and me." The wind picked up softly, carrying the desert's endless song. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its cry echoing through the canyons. But in that small barn on the edge of Dry Creek there was peace, fragile, quiet, and real. And though neither of them knew it yet, that simple act of kindness would change both their lives forever. The first light of morning crept over the mountains, painting the desert in soft gold. The air was still cool and a thin mist rose from the ground. Inside the small barn at the edge of Dry Creek, Nalin slowly opened her eyes. For a moment she did not know where she was. The scent of hay, the gentle sounds of horses shifting their weight. It all felt strange but peaceful. She sat up quietly, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders. The soreness in her legs reminded her of the long days she had spent walking through the desert. When she looked toward the barn door, she saw Cole Harding leaning against the post outside, his hat pulled low to block the sun. He was sipping from a tin cup, staring off toward the horizon as if searching for something that could not be seen. For a few seconds, Nalin just watched him. There was something steady about the man, something that made her feel safe even though they were still strangers. Cole turned when he heard the barn door creak. "You're up," he said quietly. "How you feeling?" Nalin didn't understand all his words, but his voice was kind, so she smiled weakly and nodded. He pointed toward a small table inside the barn. "There's some bread left and a bit of coffee. You can have it." She stepped forward slowly, taking a small piece of bread and holding it close to her mouth. It was dry but soft enough to eat. The warmth of the morning sun fell across her face, and for the first time in many days, she felt something close to comfort. Cole watched her eat in silence. He had questions running through his mind, who she was, where she came from, what had brought her all this way, but he didn't ask. He could tell from her tired eyes that she'd been through more than she could easily explain. After a while, he said, "You can stay here for now till you get your strength back. Don't worry, I'll make sure nobody bothers you." Nalin looked up. She caught only part of what he said, but she understood the feeling behind it. She placed a hand on her heart and nodded. "Thank you." The sound of those words, simple but full of meaning, made Cole's throat tighten a little. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him with that kind of sincerity. He stepped out of the barn, leaving her to rest while he went to the corral to check on his horse. The day was beginning to warm and he had work to do. Repairs, watering, maybe a ride into town. But even as he moved through his chores, his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman resting in his barn. In town, the story had already started to spread. Folks talked fast in Dry Creek, and by breakfast time, everyone knew that Cole Harding had taken in an Apache woman. Some people were curious, others were not so kind. At the general store, Cole could feel the stares as soon as he walked in. The shopkeeper, Mr. Hanley, gave him a nervous smile. "Morning, Cole. Heard you've got company out your way." Cole picked up a sack of flour and some beans. "Yeah, just someone who needed a place to rest." "That's all?" Hanley scratched his chin. "You be careful, friend. Folks might not like it." "Sheriff, too!" Cole met his gaze. "Ain't hurting anyone," he said simply. Then he paid and left. As he rode back toward his ranch, he thought about the words. Maybe the town would start trouble. Maybe they wouldn't, but he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of the people he used to know before life had turned so bitter. Back when he still believed that kindness could make a difference. When he reached the barn again, Nalin was sitting near the open door, mending a small tear in her blanket with a needle and thread she must have found. She looked up when she saw him, offering a shy smile. "You're feeling stronger?" he asked. She nodded. "Better. Thank you." He nodded back and set the supplies on the small table inside. "Got some food and coffee. You eat first." Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm settled between them. Cole worked around the ranch, fixing fences and tending to his horses, while Nalin helped in small ways, sweeping the barn, feeding the animals, washing the dishes. She didn't speak much English, and Cole didn't know her language, but somehow they found ways to understand each other. A nod, a smile, a gesture, it was enough. One afternoon, Cole found her outside near the corral, gently stroking the neck of his Mustang, Dusty. The horse was usually shy around strangers, but he seemed calm under her touch. Cole leaned on the fence, watching in quiet amazement. "He don't let just anyone do that," Cole said softly. Nalin looked at him, smiling faintly. "Good heart," she said, patting the horse's side. "He feels kindness." Cole tilted his hat back and smiled a little. "Guess he does." Something about her presence brought peace to the ranch. The nights no longer felt so empty. Sometimes, when the day's work was done, Cole would sit by the small fire outside and Nalin would hum old songs, soft, wordless tunes that floated through the air like a prayer. He didn't understand them, but he felt their meaning. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Cole sat sharpening a piece of wood into a handle while Nalin prepared a small pot of beans over the fire. She stirred quietly, then looked up and asked, "You live alone?" "Yesy," he replied, his voice low. "Been that way a long time," she nodded slowly. "Alone, hard," he chuckled softly. "You got that right." Then after a pause, he added, "Used to work with cattle drives. Used to have friends. But things change." Nalin listened, her eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire. "Change makes heart heavy," she said softly. Cole stared into the flames. "Yeah," he murmured. "It surely does." There was silence for a while. Only the crickets filled the night. Though their words were few, the understanding between them grew deep. Both had known loss, both carried memories they didn't speak of, and both were slowly learning that kindness could heal wounds time could not. The next morning, the calm was broken. Sheriff Briggs rode up to the ranch, his horse kicking dust as he stopped by the fence. He was a big man with a thick mustache and a serious look. "Morning, Cole," he said. "Heard you took in an Apache woman." Cole stood tall, brushing the dust from his hands. "That's right. You know how folks get nervous about that sort of thing. Some think she might be from one of the bands up north." "She's not hurting anybody," Cole said firmly. "She just needed help." The sheriff sighed. "I'm not saying she is, but if the townspeople start complaining, I'll have to step in. Keep her close to your place. Don't bring her into town unless it's necessary." Cole nodded slowly. "Understood." When the sheriff left, Cole walked back to the barn. Nalin was standing near the door, her hands twisting the edge of her blanket. She had seen the man and could tell something was wrong. "Trouble?" she asked quietly. Cole shook his head. "Nothing we can't handle." He tried to sound calm, but inside he knew things could get harder. Yet when he looked at her, standing there with quiet strength and grateful eyes, he felt something change inside him. For the first time in years, he had a reason to stand firm for something that mattered. That night, as the moon rose over the desert, Cole sat outside again, gazing at the stars. Nalin sat nearby, weaving a small piece of cloth from strands of thread she had gathered. "You should rest," Cole said softly. She looked up. "I am resting," she said with a small smile. He chuckled quietly, then looked out across the open land. You know, he said almost to himself, I never figured I'd be the kind of man who takes someone in. Guess maybe folks can change after all. Nalin didn't fully understand the words, but she felt their warmth. She placed her hand over her heart again, the same way she had that first morning, and whispered, Good man. Cole looked over at her, his eyes soft. Don't know about that, he said, but I'm trying. The wind blew gently across the plains, carrying with it the smell of mesquite and the distant sound of an owl. In that quiet night, something unseen was growing between them, trust, respect, and a strange kind of friendship neither had expected to find. Cole didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear. He could no longer look away from someone who needed him, and deep down he realized that perhaps she wasn't the only one being saved. Days turned into weeks, and the small ranch at the edge of Dry Creek began to feel like a different world. The noise of the town faded away, and all that remained was the quiet rhythm of work, the warm sun, and the growing trust between Cole Harding and Nalin. Nalin was getting stronger. The color had returned to her cheeks, and she smiled more often now. She had learned a few English words, and Cole had picked up some of hers. Their conversations were simple, short sentences, hand gestures, and laughter when they got mixed up. But they understood each other better than most people who shared the same language. Each morning, Nalin rose early to feed the chickens, collect water, and sweep the barn. She worked with quiet care, humming soft songs that filled the air like music from another world. Cole would saddle his horse and head out to check the fences, often glancing back to see her standing in the sunlight, her hair moving gently with the breeze. The Mustang, Dusty, had healed well, and Cole began taking Nalin with him on short rides through the open land. At first she was nervous, but with each trip she grew more confident. Cole would show her how to guide the reins, how to read the trail by looking at the sand, and how to find water where others saw only dry earth. One afternoon, they rode together through the shallow canyons west of the ranch. The rocks glowed warm in the light, and a soft wind carried the scent of sagebrush. Nalin rode beside him, her blanket tied around her shoulders, her eyes scanning the land with quiet wonder. This place, she said softly, is like a song. Cole smiled. Never thought of it that way, but yeah, it kind of is. They stopped near a cluster of wildflowers growing by a stream, small but bright against the desert floor. Nalin knelt and touched one gently. Even here, she said, life still finds a way. Cole looked at her and nodded slowly. Guess that's true for people too. For a moment, they just stood there, both silent, both thinking of their pasts, the hardships, the loneliness, the choices that had brought them here. It was a quiet bond, unspoken but deep. When they rode back to the ranch, the sun was setting behind the hills. The sky was painted with soft colors of gold and rose. Cole built a small fire outside while Nalin prepared a simple meal. She had learned to make his favorite, beans with bits of dried herbs, and he never told her how much he liked it. She could tell from the way he smiled each time. That night after they finished eating, Cole leaned back and said, You've got away with this place, Nalin. Animals listen to you. Even the land seems to. She laughed softly, shaking her head. No, the land listens to those who listen to it. You listen too. Cole thought about that. He had spent years riding across deserts and plains, never really stopping to listen. Maybe she was right. As peaceful as life had become, Cole could sense a quiet tension growing in the distance. He noticed how some townsfolk had stopped greeting him when he rode in. He heard the whispers when he walked into the store. To them, he wasn't just the quiet cowboy anymore. He was the man living with the Apache woman. He tried not to let it bother him. He had made his choice, and he would stand by it. But deep down, he knew that peace in the desert could be fragile. One morning, as Cole worked near the corral, he saw a dust trail rising on the far horizon. He shaded his eyes and watched it carefully. It looked like riders, 3, maybe 4, moving slowly toward town. He didn't think much of it at first, but later that day, he saw them again at a distance, heading in the direction of his ranch before turning back. That evening, as the orange glow faded from the sky, Nalin sat near the barn mending a saddle strap while Cole cleaned his tools. You look worried, she said gently, noticing the lines on his face. Just thinking, he said. Sometimes the desert brings company you don't expect. She studied him for a moment, her eyes soft. You helped me when no one would. Whatever comes, we face it together. Cole looked at her, surprised by her calm strength. You've got more courage than most folks I know, he said quietly. In the days that followed, the ranch felt different, still calm, but carrying a quiet sense of waiting. Cole taught Nolan more about the trails, how to spot tracks, and where to find shade during the hottest hours. She learned quickly, and soon she was helping him guide the horses to water and gather supplies. One afternoon, a sudden sandstorm rolled in. The sky turned pale and the wind began to howl. Cole ran to the barn, shouting for Nolan to stay close. She grabbed the reins of the frightened horses, speaking to them softly in her language until they settled. The storm lasted only a short while, but it left everything covered in fine dust. When it was over, Cole looked around at the mess and laughed softly. Well, he said, seems the desert likes to remind us who's boss. Nolan smiled, brushing sand from her hair. The desert gives and takes, she said. It tests those who live in it. Cole nodded. And we passed the test today. After that storm, something shifted between them. They began to talk more about their dreams, their hopes, and the kind of peace they wanted. Cole shared stories from his days on the trail, of endless skies and the quiet beauty of the open land. Nolan spoke of her childhood among her people, the songs her mother used to sing, and the lessons her elders had taught about respecting nature. Each story brought them closer, weaving their two worlds together like threads in the same cloth. But one afternoon, as Cole returned from town with supplies, his easy smile was gone. He set down his pack quietly, his face thoughtful. Nolan sensed something was wrong. People talk? She asked softly. Cole hesitated, then nodded. Some folks don't like what they don't understand. Sheriff says to be careful. I don't want trouble finding us. She looked at him, calm and steady. You gave me kindness. That is not wrong. He met her gaze, his voice low. I know, but kindness can make enemies in places that have forgotten it. For a long moment they said nothing. The only sound was the soft rustle of the wind through the mesquite trees. Then Nolan spoke again, her voice filled with quiet certainty. My husband once said, a heart that fears cannot walk freely. You walk freely, Cole Harding. Cole smiled faintly. You give me too much credit. No, she said softly. You gave hope when I had none. That is a kind of freedom. Her words stayed with him long after she went to rest that night. As he sat outside under the stars, Cole thought about how strange life was. He had once been a man drifting through towns, never staying long enough to care about anyone. Now he found himself guarding a quiet peace he hadn't known he needed. A coyote's distant call echoed through the hills, and the wind brushed across his face. He glanced at the barn where Nolan slept and whispered, maybe this is the start of something good. The next morning the world seemed calm again. The sun rose over the desert, lighting up the land in soft gold. Nolan came out with a small pot of coffee, smiling as she handed him a cup. Good morning, she said proudly, her English a little better now. Cole grinned. Good morning yourself. They shared a quiet laugh, and for a few brief hours, it felt as if the desert had accepted them, two lonely souls who had found peace in each other's presence. Yet beyond the hills, the faint sound of hoofbeats carried on the wind. Cole didn't hear them yet. But the desert, as Nolan had said, always had a way of testing those who tried to call it home. And this time, the test would ask not for strength of body, but for the courage of the heart. The summer sun had grown stronger, and the desert wind carried the smell of dust and sagebrush. The quiet days at the ranch began to feel almost too peaceful, like the calm before a change. For Cole Harding and Naylin, each day started early. She would gather water and feed the hens while he checked the fences and cared for the horses. In the afternoons, they often shared lunch under the shade of the barn, talking in simple words and smiles. Life, though small and plain, had begun to take on a warmth neither had known in a long time. Yet Cole could not ignore the unease that sometimes tugged at the back of his mind. He knew people in Dry Creek still whispered. He had heard one man mutter near the saloon that Harding's got himself mixed up in Indian trouble. Another had said, she don't belong here. Cole had learned long ago that you can't change people's hearts overnight. Still, the words stayed with him like pebbles in his boot. One afternoon, as he came back from town, he found Nolan sitting outside near the corral. She was weaving a necklace from tiny desert seeds. When she saw him, her eyes brightened. You come back safe, she said. Cole smiled. Always do. He handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Got you something. Inside was a piece of soft fabric the color of the sky, a gift he had traded for quietly at the general store. Nolan's eyes widened as she ran her fingers across it. Beautiful, she whispered. You think of me. Cole nodded, a little shy. Seemed right that you had something that was yours. Nolan smiled warmly, her eyes shining. Thank you, Cole Harding. That night they sat outside under the stars. The air was cool and full of cricket songs. Cole looked toward the horizon and said, You know, Nayland, I used to think I was done caring about anything. Then you showed up and somehow everything feels different. She looked at him softly. Different is good. When hearts open, the world grows kinder. Cole let out a slow breath. You've got a way of saying things that make sense. Nolan laughed lightly, the sound like water over smooth stones. Days passed quietly until one evening when dark clouds began to gather in the distance. A storm was coming. The air turned heavy and the smell of rain filled the sky. Cole and Nolan worked together to bring the horses inside and cover the tools. By the time the first drops began to fall, the barn doors were closed tight. The storm broke loose with a roar. Lightning flashed far away, lighting the desert hills for only a second at a time. Inside the barn, the horses stirred uneasy. Cole held one by the reins, speaking gently, while Nolan whispered calm words in her own tongue. After a while, the wind softened, and the rain became a gentle patter. They both stood near the doorway, watching the water fall. The desert, dry and silent for so long, drank deeply from the sky. It's beautiful, Nolan said quietly. Yeah, Cole answered. Kind of feels like the world's washing itself clean. When the storm ended, the air was cool and sweet. The stars began to show again, shining brighter than ever. It was one of those rare nights when the land felt new, like a promise had been made between heaven and earth. But not all promises are kept easily. The next morning, Cole rode into town for supplies. He noticed a few men standing outside the sheriff's office, their faces stern. Sheriff Briggs came out to meet him. Morning, Cole, he said. Need a word? Cole dismounted slowly. What's going on? Briggs sighed. Some folks have been asking questions again. They think that woman you've got might be from one of the old camps up north. They're scared, Cole. You know how fear works around here. Cole looked him straight in the eye. She's just trying to live. Ain't done a thing to anyone. I know that, Briggs said, lowering his voice. But not everyone sees it that way. I'm asking you, be careful. Maybe keep her out of sight for a while. Cole nodded, though his jaw tightened. She's not hiding, Sheriff. Not from anyone. When he returned to the ranch, Nolan saw the worry on his face before he said a word. They speak again? She asked. Yeah, he said softly. But don't you trouble yourself about it. You've done nothing wrong. Nolan looked out across the open land. Sometimes people see shadows where there is only light. Cole smiled faintly. That's the truth. That night, the two of them sat by the small fire again. Nolan began to hum one of her songs, soft, slow, and full of peace. Cole closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him like the rain had washed the earth. When she finished, he said, What's that one mean? She thought for a moment, then answered, It means hearts that walk together never walk alone. It's an old song, one my mother sang when we traveled far from home. Cole looked at her, his voice quiet. Then maybe we ain't alone anymore. She smiled, her eyes shining in the firelight. No, not anymore. The next morning the sky was clear and the desert sparkled after the rain. Cole and Nolan went riding out toward the canyon to check the water holes. The world looked fresh and full of life, flowers blooming where none had been before, birds flying low across the sky. When they reached a high ridge, Nolan pointed to the horizon. Look, she said. The desert lives again. Cole nodded, feeling something stir deep inside him, a quiet sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He looked at Nolan, her hair shining in the sunlight, and thought how strange life was. He had once believed he'd live and die alone, but now, standing beside her, the thought no longer seemed true. They sat on that ridge for a long time, saying nothing, just listening to the wind move through the canyons. The world seemed vast and open, yet somehow it felt smaller, closer, because they shared it. As they rode back home, Cole said, You ever think maybe we were meant to cross paths? Nolan smiled gently. The wind carries people where they are needed most. He laughed softly. Guess that means the wind had plans for me. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Cole helped Nalin down from her horse, and for a moment their hands lingered. There was no need for words. They both knew that something had changed, something quiet but strong. That night, Cole couldn't sleep. He walked outside, staring up at the stars. The desert was silent except for the gentle rustle of the wind. He thought about his past, the mistakes, the loneliness, the times he'd turned away from others because it was easier than caring. Now, for the first time, he felt something different, a chance to make things right, to protect something good, something pure. He looked toward the barn where Nalin slept and whispered, "You gave me back my heart, Nalin. Guess I better start using it right." The desert air was cool, and a shooting star crossed the sky. Cole watched it fade, smiling softly to himself. Somewhere deep inside, he understood that redemption didn't come from big acts or grand gestures. It came quietly, from kindness, from patience, from choosing to stand by what's right even when it wasn't easy. And in that still night, surrounded by endless sky, Cole Harding knew that the hardest test wasn't surviving the desert. It was learning how to let love and peace grow in a place that had forgotten them. He turned and walked back toward the barn, where a small lantern glowed faintly through the wood. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but for now the desert rested. And so did Cole's heart. The days that followed were calm and golden. The desert stretched wide and quiet around Cole Harding's small ranch, and the wind carried the smell of wildflowers blooming after the rain. The earth, once dry and harsh, seemed softer now, alive again, as if nature itself had chosen to start over. Inside that quiet world, Cole and Nalin found a rhythm that felt almost like home. Morning began with the cry of the rooster and the soft creak of the barn door. Nalin would bring water from the well, her footsteps light and sure. Cole would feed the horses, humming tunelessly, though he'd never admit it. By midday, they'd share coffee and bread in the shade, talking about simple things: the weather, the animals, the beauty of the land. Their words were few, but their silences were full of meaning. In those quiet pauses, they found a comfort words could not give. Nalin often spent her afternoons gathering herbs and seeds from the land nearby. She said the earth gave gifts if you knew where to look. Cole would sometimes follow, curious about her ways. She showed him plants that could soothe pain, others that could bring calm sleep. "You see," she said once, holding up a small green sprig, "the desert may look empty, but it hides kindness." Cole smiled. "Guess that's true for people too." Nalin looked at him, her eyes soft. "Yes, even when hearts are dry, rain still comes." He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him long after. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm gold, Cole sat outside repairing a leather strap while Nalin ground herbs into a small bowl. The air smelled faintly of earth and smoke. After a while, she looked up at him. "Cole," she said slowly, "you helped me when I had nothing." "Why?" Cole set down the strap and thought for a moment. "I don't rightly know," he said. "Guess I saw someone who needed a hand and I just couldn't walk away. Maybe I was tired of being the kind of man who did." She smiled gently. "When you gave kindness, you healed your own heart too." He nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." As the stars began to rise, they both fell quiet. A soft wind brushed across the land, carrying the faint sound of an owl from the hills. The world felt still, peaceful in a way Cole hadn't known in years. But even peace, he knew, could not last forever unchanged. A few days later, Sheriff Briggs rode up to the ranch again. Cole saw him from afar, his horse raising small clouds of dust as it came closer. He wiped his hands on his shirt and walked out to meet him. The sheriff greeted him with a tired smile. "Afternoon, Cole. Don't mean to bother you, but I wanted to let you know something." Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. "What's that?" Briggs sighed. "Word came down from the folks up north. They've set up a new place. Not a camp, but a proper settlement. Peaceful folks. A few families from the Apache tribes are gathering there. They've asked if any who are wandering need a place to stay." Cole looked toward the barn where Nalin was tending to the chickens. "You saying she ought to go there?" "I'm saying it might be safer," the sheriff said kindly. "No one will trouble her there. She'll be among her own again." Cole nodded slowly. "I'll tell her." That evening, as the sky turned deep orange, Cole sat down beside Nalin near the small fire. She was quiet, tracing shapes in the dirt with a stick. He took a breath. The sheriff came by today, she looked up. He bring trouble? No, Cole said softly. He brought news. There's a new place being built north of here. For your people. Safe, he says. Peaceful. You could go there if you wanted. Nalan was silent for a long time. Her eyes reflected the firelight, calm but thoughtful. A place for my people, she said slowly. That sounds like a dream, Cole nodded. Maybe it's time you had one. She looked at him. And you? He smiled faintly. I'll be here. Always figured I'd end my days out in this desert. It's home, far as I've got one. For a moment they just looked at each other. Then Nalan reached out, placing her hand gently over his. You gave me more than food and shelter. You gave me peace. That doesn't end when I leave. Cole swallowed hard. You sure you want to go? She nodded. I must. My heart will always remember this place. And you. The next morning was still and pale. The sky was wide and endless, filled with soft light. Cole helped her prepare for the journey. He packed food, water, and the soft blue cloth he had given her, now sewn into part of her dress. You'll need this, he said, handing her his old hat. Desert sun's not gentle, she smiled. Then you'll miss your hat. I got another. He lied with a grin. They shared a quiet breakfast, the kind where every sound feels important. The creak of the wood, the chirp of a bird, the clink of the coffee pot. When it was time to go, Nalan stood by her horse looking at the small ranch one last time. This place, she said softly. It was broken once, but now it lives again. Like us, Cole nodded. Guess we both did some healing here. She took a deep breath. I will tell my people about the man with a kind heart who listened to the wind. He smiled gently. Tell him I wasn't always kind. But I'm learning. Nalan reached up, touching his arm lightly. You are good, Cole Harding. The desert saw it. I saw it too. He couldn't find words, so he simply tipped his hat and nodded. Safe travels, Nalan. She mounted her horse, her blanket draped neatly across her shoulders. The morning light touched her face, making her look almost like part of the land itself. Strong, graceful, and eternal. As she rode away across the open desert, Cole stood watching until she was a distant shape against the sky. The wind blew softly, lifting a few strands of dust, carrying her presence even after she had gone. For a long while, he didn't move. Then he turned toward the barn. Dusty whinnied softly as if asking where she had gone. She's where she belongs, Cole whispered. And I reckon I am too. That evening he sat outside alone. The sun sank behind the hills and the first stars began to appear. The land was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full, not empty. He looked down at his hands, calloused and worn. Once they had known only work and struggle. Now, they had known kindness too. In the distance, he thought he could hear faint singing carried by the wind, soft, like Nalan's voice. He smiled to himself. Maybe it was just his imagination, or maybe the desert was singing her song back to him. He rose and walked to the barn, touching the wooden door gently. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of her herbs. On the small table lay the necklace she had woven from desert seeds. He picked it up, turning it in his hand. Guess you left me something to remember you by, he murmured. He hung the necklace by the window, where the sunlight could reach it each morning. Then he sat down, staring out at the endless horizon. Time passed, but Cole never forgot her. He kept her teachings, listening to the wind, caring for the land, finding peace in small things. He helped travelers who passed by, offering food, water, and kind words. Some said he had changed. Others said he had found his soul again. Years later, when the rains came heavy and wildflowers covered the desert floor, the locals said it felt like a blessing. Cole smiled whenever he heard that. He liked to think Nalan was out there somewhere, smiling too. Sometimes, at dusk, he'd sit by the fire and hum the soft tune she once sang, the one that meant, hearts that walk together never walk alone. And though she was far away, her spirit remained, in the whispering wind, in the songs of the land, in the small kindness that had once brought two lonely souls together. Cole Harding had found redemption, not through grand deeds but through quiet mercy. And in that mercy, the desert found its peace again.